the Biden crime wave is capturing a lot of attention out there in the media, and also the people who are the victims of the surge in crime that is permeating itself throughout the country. Now, this is something that we spent a lot of time talking about. So I want to give a quick little breakdown of sort of how this channel came to be. If you're not familiar, if you haven't been with us for a long period of time, we've had a lot of growth. The channel has gotten a lot of attention, and because I think we're talking about and having the important conversations that unfortunately some other people are not having. But I digress. Let's go back to the origin story here. So as we all know, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I used to make these videos where I would actually call out the police officers. So I'd actually kind of hold up their mugshot and say, hey, this officer got arrested for this. If you've been stopped by this officer, your case may be able to be dismissed because he breached protocol. Who's to say he didn't breach protocol in your case? Give our office a call, right? And so I'd be very aggressive towards law enforcement. And this was back in, I would say late 2019, kind of working into early 2020. And I was doing a lot of public speaking, and I was sort of out there, engaging with different recovery and treatment centers throughout Arizona. And then COVID hit. And so I thought, oh man, all of these things got canceled. And so I couldn't go in person anymore. So I thought I have to sort of, make sure that I'm still connecting with people some way. And decided to start a live show here on YouTube. That was about March 2020 because of the context of the coronavirus. Everything was locking down, no more public speaking. So I just had to sort of say, okay, let's try this live show thing and see how this works. I was sort of freaked out. I've got an entire law firm that I wanted to keep open, and I wanted to make sure that we could keep, representing our clients and maintain our office so that our team can, provide for their families. And so it was sort of a stressful time. So we decided to go online, and I was still somebody at that time who was sort of, kind of aggressive towards law enforcement. And that was my watching the watchers, right? Let's hold the police accountable, because in March 2020, not a lot of people were talking much about this stuff. And then we fast forward. And so let me back up there. At the early outset of the show, I would say that if we're talking about this spectrum of sort of where you fall, I was a little bit more sort of like, let's say, pro-police reform, let's put it that way. And I was very, in favor of that, talking a lot about those issues. Then something very interesting happened as the timeline progressed a little bit. So then we get to about May, and George Floyd happens. George Floyd is killed by Derek Chauvin, and the entire conversation changed overnight, immediately. Everybody suddenly was interested in criminal justice reform. And so here is little old me going, whoa, wait a minute. I was out here screaming from the rooftops about this stuff in March. Suddenly we fast forward to May, and all of this stuff is now unfolding right in front of our eyes. And I'm thinking, great, this is great. Finally, oh my gosh, I've been practicing law for all these years, and I've been screaming about this stuff from the rooftops. Finally, we're going to get some criminal justice reform conversations taking place in this country. And we did for about 20 seconds. Then the conversation shifted a little bit. Before it did, though, remember that moment when sort of America was unified, when we were all sort of getting together and going, oh man, what we saw there was terrible. Regardless of what we learned after the fact about Floyd's fentanyl or methamphetamine use or coronary disease or any of the other contributing factors that, in my opinion, created some pretty serious reasonable doubt. At the time, after we saw what happened there, when we all saw the footage, we didn't know much else about the case, and everybody was unified. Everybody just saw what they saw, and they said, I don't like that. And maybe we need to have a little bit of a conversation about humanity between law enforcement and the people that they're arresting. And I was all on board for that. Absolutely, let's have this conversation, because we represent people who are subject in many cases to law enforcement. It can be very difficult to have to sort of sit there with their families and explain that, hey, this is just how the system is. I know it's terrible, but this is how it is. And so now we're starting to say, okay, finally, we're having this real conversation. And then something happened. The whole dynamic shifted again. It went from having a real conversation about reasonable justice reform to defund the police. And suddenly we started to see buildings being burnt down, and the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis got burnt to the ground. We've got Portland being, Molotov cocktails are being lobbed their direction at the courthouse. And so we're just seeing sort of chaos spread throughout the country, all on the back of this apparently pro-justice reform movement, which wasn't really about justice at all anymore. It was about sort of, exacting, revenge, expressing your displeasure with the current state of law enforcement. I don't really know what was gained by any of those protests or any of those, non-peaceful protests. not much good came out of that, because what ended up happening is it alienated everybody who was on the side of justice reform. They said, oh, well, if that's what justice reform looks like, if the solution to this is to defund the police, well, I don't want any part of it. And so I've been saying on this channel, as we've been going through this timeline, that the pendulum is going to swing the other way. It's going to happen, and we're getting very close to this. Now, of course, the White House is concerned over a surge in violent crime. So we can see that there. Let's make sure, let's do an auto. Let's swap this over here so we can get a nice cut. All right, so we'll get that nice little transition there. Apologies for that. All right, so this article here, now we can see it says concerns are rising inside the White House over a surge in violent crime. So written here by Jeff Zeleny and Kevin Liptak. And so concerns are rising. And you go, yeah, of course they are. Right? Why wouldn't they be? Because literally, different city councils around this country started to defund the police. We saw this, 6 million gone, and they brought 6 million back. And the list goes on and on. Around the country, we've seen city councils say, nope, we're going to move it from the police over to community supervisors or whatever. And now the pendulum is swinging back the other direction. There was a lot of momentum against the police. And I've been saying this for a long time here. I totally disavowed BLM and all of those organizations because they became politicized. And the only momentum, or the only action item that they had on their list of 7 demands was to defund the police as it comes to justice reform. The other 6 demands were all about, you know, political, remove Trump, don't let him run again, get him off the internet, blah, 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 useless stuff. Nothing to do with justice reform. So it was kind of an embarrassment of a movement, but we all knew that this was going to go the other direction. There was going to be a lot of calls for defunding the police. The police, rightfully so, we're going to get agitated about that. Oh, you don't want me here policing you and protecting your neighborhood, and you think that I'm a racist piece of human debris? Well, then how about I just don't come back? How about I just pick a different profession? Because I am free to do that. I'm not obligated to come and protect and serve you. If you don't value my services, you're free to pick up and go, right? This is America. You're free to do that stuff, which I encourage everybody to do. If you're not, if you're not happy, well, you have many people have at least a modicum of flexibility to make some changes in their lives, but they just tell themselves a bunch of things that they put in front of themselves as roadblocks because they don't actually want to make some hard decisions. But this is now something that we can see the pendulum swinging the other direction. We're seeing murder rates rise. We're seeing crime go through the roof, and the White House is suddenly concerned about this. So let's go back over to this article here from CNN. They're saying that a nationwide surge in violent crime has emerged as a growing area of concern inside the White House. Joe Biden's aides listened with alarm as local authorities warn a brutal summer of killing lies ahead. Okay, so let's see what else this says. Now, my first instinct on this, right, I've got two thoughts on this. Number one, yeah, there probably is a very serious crime problem because the policies and the politicization of the conversation taking place around justice reform has created some pretty strong disincentives for good law enforcement to stick around any further, right? Why would they stick around? They can just, move on, go to a different jurisdiction, pick up their family, come to a different, come to Texas or Arizona, where maybe we don't say that, some of the same things you might hear in Portland or Minneapolis or, Seattle, for example. So police are saying, we're going to pick up and move. That's one reason why this is a obvious outcome. Not even a surprise. But the other thing that's so interesting about this is that, Joe Biden's got a lot of experience in this area. Okay, remember this. He passed a bunch of crime bills from the 1980s all the way through the 1990s. We had the 1984 crime bill, the 1986 crime bill, which was in response to crack cocaine. That's where we got mandatory sentencing for crack cocaine offenders, adversely dramatically impacted the African-American community adversely because that drug was ripping through their community. So Joe Biden, I've been saying this for a long time, has been responsible for the incarceration of more Black Americans than any person in modern American history. So maybe in history entirely. I don't know the numbers on that, but I would venture, I would love to know who's more responsible for the incarceration of more people than Joe Biden. And if you want to really add the trifecta there, the double team duo, we've got add Kamala Harris as prosecutor and attorney general. So these people have been prosecuting crimes. We got the 1986 crime bill, then we got the 1994 crime bill, which was a massive overhaul. We got the 3 strikes rule out of Joe Biden, mandatory sentencing. All of these tough on crime, BS nonsense laws came out of it, and we're now dealing with the repercussions of it. So this administration is perfectly suited for, I guess, cleaning up crime. They've got about 35 years of experience doing so. And so now what we're seeing is, we're alarmed about it again. So what are we going to do? That you just got done for the last year or so talking about and empathizing with defund the police. Now, to Joe Biden's credit, right, he never sort of said that. And he's actually on record saying a few times that, no, I've never supported defund the police. It's a stupid idea. But you've got sort of his wingman, Kamala Harris, who's actually donating or posting on her Twitter to go and support the bail funds that are helping people get out of custody, the same very people who burnt down the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis. On her Twitter, it's probably still there. We covered it a couple months ago. So the whole thing is kind of, hilarious that it's sad as hell, but you can see the pendulum swinging the other way. The Democrats here essentially caused this riff largely. Many people would say it's the police or George Floyd started it. I'm sorry, that Derek Chauvin and the George Floyd incident started it. And so the community reaction to it necessitated what was necessary in order to push back on the site to break the cycle. And then the police, they're leaving, and so they've got a better they should have a bigger responsibility to continue to protect and serve their communities. And so it's the chicken or the egg thing. We can play this game all day long and where this goes. But policy-wise, in the last 12 months, what has changed? Okay, we've had a lot of people now talking about defund the police. When that happens, when you tell the people who are supposed to be on your team that you really don't value them much anymore, they pick up and leave. These consequences are just, in my mind, entirely obvious. So they're creating sort of this problem of increased criminality by incentivizing officers to leave, by defunding police departments. And now what's going to happen is they're going to recognize, oh my gosh, there's a big problem. We have to come back out here and address violent crime. And so what are they going to do? We've already been hearing about guns a lot, right? We've been hearing about guns all over the place, about how dangerous they are, and about how many murders are happening. So I also get a little bit skeptical about this, right? We always hear never let a crisis go to waste. So we definitely have a crime surge that the Democrats, in my opinion, largely are exacerbating by not being more vehemently opposed to defund the police. And they are saying that that increase in crime now needs to be addressed. Oh, well, the Democrats have a very easy solution for that, don't they? It's probably going to be in the form of gun control. So just get ready for that coming down the pike. All right, enough. Let's get into it now. Biden plans to address the spike in shootings, right? Armed robberies and vicious assaults on Wednesday afternoon following a meeting with local officials. They're concerned about combating the trend. Now, he hopes to dampen what has already become a cudgel for Republicans eager to run a law and order campaign in next year's midterm elections. President is poised to announce a comprehensive crime reduction strategy. Officials said, we've got some information on what that's going to look like, to address the root causes of the spike. And you'll notice this, reducing gun violence, right? So that is obviously going to be the centerpiece of this. He plans to sign executive actions. We'll see what those look like, with a particular focus on tamping down gun crimes. Gun crimes, according to officials, while again calling on Congress to take steps to enact new gun control laws. He is also set to press Congress to confirm Dave Chipman as his nominee to lead the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. So there you go, folks, right? Looks like it's going to be a gun grab effort. It's going to be a Second Amendment assault, sort of couched in the frame of being anti-crime. Now, they just sort of caused a lot of this crime by creating a lot of this racial division that's taking place throughout the schools. We're having a lot of conversations about the oppressors versus the oppressees, even, with 8-year-olds around this country. And now we've got a lot of crime bursting through the seams, in large part, in my opinion, due to conditions that were created by the national narrative that the country's been going through for the last 18 months. And their solution: we got to get rid of the guns. We got to come and take your guns in order to deal with these murders. It's the murders, right? And it's the armed robberies, not just the robberies, the armed robberies, as CNN points out. And what are we seeing, right? You can see it in the media. You can see the narrative just developing, this thing just bursting at the seams. Here is NBC News. Now, they're going to give us a lot of headlines. Look at all this gun violence. We've got Tim Fitzsimmons here, says the weekend gun violence shakes gatherings in cities across the U.S. It's almost like there's an epidemic of gun violence, isn't there? Gun violence marred outdoor-indoor gatherings in cities. We've got Colorado Springs. They had back-to-back shootings. 5 people injured on Friday night. 6 people shot in Louisiana. We've got Flint, Michigan. Woman died after she was fatally shot by police. She was exchanging gunfire with them. Lots of guns, lots of shootings. The suspect, whose name was not released, died at a hospital. Elsewhere in the Midwest, we've got NBC Chicago. At least 5 people were killed, dozens injured in gun violence there. We've got Wichita, police officer hospitalized after there was a shooting there. Another shooting here, somebody was killed in an exchange with police. Texas, 8 people were shot at a party. Police said the shooting happened in an argument after it broke out. Northern California, 7 people shot in Oakland. We've got Oakland PD saying, okay, right, so you get the gist of it, that it's shooting. It's responsible for all the crimes. Everybody's being shot. All right. And the mayors now are going, well, we can't solve this problem. I mean, we need the federal government to come in and help us. So the Washington Post is reporting, as homicides soar nationwide, mayors see few options for regaining control. So they can't figure out their local problems themselves. And what are they doing as mayor? All right. Killings rolled over the country like a fast-moving storm from Savannah to Austin, Chicago to Cleveland, 6 hours in one night, 4 mass shooting attacks. So you see how this goes? We have done almost all we can do, said Van Johnson, mayor of Savannah, Georgia. The tools for fighting back, says Austin Mayor Steve Adler, are limited without state and federal help. Got to get the feds going. We've got, so I'd be curious what all these affiliations are. We've got a Democrat over there. It's going to get worse, says Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, Democrat. As the homicide rate climbed through a year of pandemic-imposed shutdowns and civil unrest, officials held firm in their belief that the rise was driven by an exceptional set of circumstances. But as life returned to normal, the killings would slow. But even as the restrictions have lifted and protests have quieted in recent months, the violence has not subsided. Indeed, it has continued to grow. And now local leaders are grappling with the possibility that they had long feared, that a decades-long era of declining murder rates may be over and that increased killings may be here to stay. There's nothing, said Jackson, that's going to bring this down in the near future. Okay, so that's good. So that's really nice, glass half full, optimistic leadership from these useless mayors. We've got Austin Mayor Steve Adler. Oh, we're limited. We need state and federal help. Okay, so state help I can understand. But the feds coming in here and getting involved in any of this stuff, we've got enough law enforcement layered on top of everything we do in society. We don't need more of it. All right, so we've got Baltimore police. She says that she's calling for boots on the ground. So, we've got another Baltimore police commissioner. We've got Michael Harrison said Tuesday he would like more, quote, boots on the ground and additional funding to help his department amid a surge in violent crime. During an interview with Jake Tapper, Harrison noted that Baltimore and other big cities are seeing a spike in violence, Maryland recording 18 homicides in the past days. The police chief said that this has resulted from a number of issues like gang violence and retaliation from bad acts, but the city has seen a particular increase in close acquaintance shootings and domestic violence. Harrison, who said his department is roughly 230 officers short. I wonder why that might be. Why would officers who are scolded and have their fingers wagged in their faces all the time by people like me, actually, why would they just pick up and leave, right? Why would they do this? Now, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so I think that's pretty pertinent for me to, be able to sort of express my concerns with the lack of accountability, transparency, or justice as it relates to bad officers. But I have never once on this channel, not once, said that I agree with defunding the police or that any good officers should be considered to be racist, whatever. Never, ever said that. But the bad officers, yeah, they've got to go. But that same standard, in my opinion, has not been applied across the board. I haven't seen that. I've seen a lot of people saying that ACAB, all cops are bad, or another word, right? And we've seen a lot of momentum from Democrats, and really not even the mainstream Democrats, more people on the left wing who sort of have commandeered a large part of the party, making arguments that, no, when we mean defund the police, we mean defund the police. I didn't make a slide about this, but if you go online and type that into Google, we actually mean defund the police. You're going to see tons of articles. This is something that is actually has momentum in that political side of the aisle. So 230 officers, they're gone. Nobody wants to come and work a thankless job. Why would they? So he says, well, we want to build those relationships. We need the community's help in helping us solve these murders so we can hold these bad actors accountable for terrorizing our community. Yeah, it's a sad thing. It's sad because these communities are going to be hurt. It's all right. So let's take a look now. I said previously that I've got some concerns here that maybe some of this is about an attack on the Second Amendment, coming after the guns, the firearms. We've been seeing this a lot. We've been hearing this for a long time, and I just went through, showed you some of the headlines. Shooting, 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 shooting. They are going to smack us in the face with this for the next several months. Gun violence, gun violence, gun violence. Every single thing is going to be about gun violence. So let's take a look now at some gun statistics. I've got a big problem with some of these numbers here, but I want to show you where this data comes from. So if you remember Gabby Giffords was shot here in Arizona, and she has sort of become a figurehead for anti-gun violence. And I don't want any gun violence at all. I certainly want to make sure that our Second Amendment is protected and that we have a very safe and liberty-oriented concept around how that is functional in America. But I also certainly don't want gun violence, right? I think that it is not, I want to make sure that's not happening. So Gabby Giffords now is sort of somebody who is spearheading this conversation. She has an organization here called Giffords Courage to Fight Gun Violence. And so you see Gabby's story, right? She was shot. This is a portrait of her. There was a shooting took place in Tucson, Arizona. She was shot. She survived. And actually, her husband now is a senator here in Arizona. So we've got history. In the wake of the tragedy, she turned her outrage into action. She works against gun violence. Contact us, right? She's a journalist. If you're somebody can contact us. Okay. So the reason I wanted to show you this, we often talk about looking at data in a light most favorable to the people making the claim. So give them the benefit of the doubt. If they're gonna make the argument, all right, let's take their argument. Let's say everything's true, and let's analyze it. Because if you can beat their argument at the best, well, then you can beat it sort of at any other way. So you give them the benefit of the doubt. But I want to just show you this. There's not actually much to really analyze here. This comes over from the CDC. This was a graphic that was drafted over here by Gabby Giffords, her organization. She says here, you can see that gun deaths are on the rise nationally. So from about 2009 to about 2018, where the data stops, so super old data, we go about it looks like maybe just if you're checking the scale, about 9,000 votes, right? So deaths, not votes. 9,000 deaths here over the course of about 10 years or so. So, it definitely looks dramatic because it is almost a quarter or a third of the total deaths that we had in 2009. And so deaths are on the rise. Quick point on this, though. The data is from 2018. So we have a very big data problem in this country, in my humble opinion. We have, if you go over to the CDC, you can take a look at their gun data, and it says for the closest you can go back is 2019. It's 2 years old. Okay, so age-adjusted deaths here, we can go back to 2019, but we can't really see anything more recent than that. I think this is a big problem with a lot of the things that we're doing in Arizona. And I listened to a podcast actually it was a Clubhouse recording that I was listening to with a lot of people in the sort of the crypto space. We're having a conversation and talking about the need to sort of rebuild America's information supply chains so that we can get better data more quickly. And I think there was a really good idea here that when somebody dies, you don't actually need to get all of the data about them. So you don't need their name and next of kin and what their medical history was or any of that stuff. There should be some sort of a way that we just document deaths sort of immediately, and they go into this big database that we can all sort of see what the trends look like. So you can see immediately that this person died at this date and time at this location, and maybe a couple quick identifying factors so that person doesn't get double counted. But the theory would be that if you have these, so as soon as law enforcement shows up to a shooting, they enter some sort of quick thing into an app or something. Okay, we got this one. Make sure that we notify it, goes into a national database, and you can see numbers in real time. Right? You don't necessarily have to know every single thing about that death, but at least we see what happened. And we say with the initial suspected death, firearm death. Or this would have been extremely powerful for COVID, right? What if we just had, suspected COVID death. And rather than locking down, let's say every state, we could say we got in real time, we've got a big problem over here in New York. We're going to make sure that that's dealt with. But in Idaho, things are pretty fine over there, right? It's all well and good that we have no deaths, we've got no hospitalizations. You can do the same thing for hospitalizations, suspected COVID here, and we can have data really in real time from all across the country. And so, maybe they have something like that, but they don't tell the public about that, of course. They don't give us any of that information. And so we're dealing with numbers from 2019 from the CDC. So thanks, great. So, all right, we've got now when we break down those 2018 numbers, we saw that these were almost 39,000 deaths, a lot of deaths. But when you break that number up, you'll see about 22,000 of those, about 23,000, 61% of those are suicides. Okay, so about only 13 or 36% of those are homicides. And so they're not giving us year over year over what that breakdown looks like. So in other words, so let's say this is the y-axis, the x-axis. Now we have, theoretically, we could have homicides that are still like this, but we have suicides that are like that. And so they're saying this is an increase in gun violence, but is it really gun violence or is it an increase in suicide? Right? We don't know because we have useless data. We have some other statistics here from Gabby Gifford. Says key findings: someone's killed in the U.S. every 13 minutes in 2019. We had 39,700 dead, but they say it's from gun violence, right? But like I get it, I get the legal definition of that. But if somebody dies by suicide, that's not somebody shooting somebody else. That's somebody shooting themselves. I don't know if that's properly categorized there. Anyways, during the last decade, number of deaths increased 25%, 31,000 to 39,000. So that's the number. Firearms continue to drive the suicide epidemic. 50% of all suicides involved firearms. So 24,000 died, 60% of all gun deaths. So, I don't know that's necessarily properly categorized. But listen, so now we have a framework for what's going on. We know that there's this crime wave that's working its way through the system. And Joe Biden's going to give us a big speech, and he's going to read from his note cards and a teleprompter, and he's probably going to slur all over himself. And we're going to see if he's able to muster out any coherent philosophy about justice reform. Because we know he's been wrecking it for the last 35 years. Literally, I did the math on that. Back to 1986. 35 years. Now, today, he's sort of having a conversation about reducing the same mandatory sentencing for crack cocaine that he implemented in 1986. He's now saying, we're going to sort of unring that bell a little bit. He's going to unwind that. And there's some pretty big sentencing disparities between, let's say, crack cocaine and another drug. One of those had a very increased penalty. Why? I don't know why. But I tell you what, the consequences were that it adversely impacted African-American communities more than any other community in this country. So Joe Biden's got to answer for that. Now, he's got to come out here today, and we're going to see what he has to say. It doesn't really matter, as I said, because the Justice Department is already giving us some information on what they intend to do, and they're the real actors here. Joe Biden's just, silly old man just kind of, acting as president. Now we have the Justice Department yesterday. They gave us a press release. They say here that the Justice Department announces the formation of the Firearms Trafficking Strike Forces. Oh, there it is, folks. So it didn't even take long. Let's go through this. They've got Firearms Trafficking Strike Forces to crack down on the sources of crime guns. Okay, so they're going to go after the sources. We'll see how that works. Today, Department of Justice announced it's going to launch a 5 cross-jurisdictional firearms trafficking strike force. Next 30 days, they're going to reduce violent crime by addressing illegal gun trafficking in significant firearms trafficking corridors. So let's see. Tomorrow, which is today, Attorney General is going to talk with the president about whatever comprehensive strategy to combat the rise in violent crime. He's got Joe Biden has a lot of experience in passing massive criminal bills, tons of them, 1984, 1986, and so on. In fact, at one point in time, Joe Biden said any criminal justice bill that came out of Congress since 1976, I think it was, has Joe Biden's name on it. He's very proud of this record. So now, good news, we've got somebody who has been incarcerating people for the last 40 years or so. He's now going to be in charge of solving violent crime. So I'm looking forward to that. Are you looking forward to that? Because the current state of our justice system is a direct result of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And now they're going to be tackling it again. So I'm great. Let's get into it. Gun violence, they say, is a major driver in the increase of violent crime over the last 18 months, right? Gun violence. It's not anything else. It's not COVID lockdowns. It's not economic hardship. It's not climate change, as Kamala Harris went down to Guatemala and made a big deal about that. Okay, it's gun violence is the major problem for the violent crime. It's not CRT being taught in the schools. It's not the milking of racial animosity between different groups. It's not pitting one American against another American in class warfare. Everywhere we turn, it's none of that. It's gun violence. And today's action is an important step in stemming the supply. So they're going to stop the supply. If we can just stop the supply, That'll be great. So Merrick Garland came out and said, working with our local partners to tackle violent crime is very important to us. Our firearms trafficking strike forces will investigate and disrupt the networks that channel crime guns into our communities with tragic consequences. 5 strike forces, he says, are going to be focused on different corridors. We're going to go to New York. We got Chicago. We got LA. We got San Francisco Bay. And we got Washington, D.C. Going to be led by U.S. attorneys, of course, being run by the ATF, local law enforcement, and other partners. Strike forces will share information and otherwise collaborate, tracking the guns from where they're coming unlawfully to where they commit violent crimes. Wrapping this up, it says, at an event today hosted by the Police Executive Research Forum, attended by hundreds of law enforcement professionals, Attorney General spoke about the strike force launch. So that's Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Attorney General, emphasizing the commitment to working closely with local partners. We're going to build on the broader now, the Violent Crime Reduction Initiative. Okay, so Biden's going to come out today and talk about a bunch of stuff, but they've already announced really the big hefty thing that they're going to be doing. It's this Violent Crime Reduction Initiative. Okay, this was announced May 26, 2021, and so it's not that old. Supports local communities in prosecuting, preventing, investigating, of course, gun violence. Now they say other violent crime. So in guidance to federal agents and the prosecutors, the deputy attorney made clear that firearms traffickers have enforcement priority across the country. Okay, so they're sort of flagging for us. Violent crime, and what causes the violent crime? The guns. And what are we going to do about that? We're going to go deal with the source of the guns, the firearms traffickers. They're going to go to a couple different places: New York, Chicago, LA, San Fran, Washington, D.C. And Chicago, that's a good spot. Yeah, right. I mean, we just saw, I think in the previous article, something like 18 deaths. So I want to go back now. Let's take a quick look at this previous effort to reduce violent crime. So this came out on May 26 now, and it is at Washington, D.C. I want to show you these 4 bullet points that they gave us. So it says the strategy here is a 3-pronged approach. First, it establishes 4 fundamental principles that are going to apply to violent crime reduction. And so, this is sort of what, you think about this like a mission statement. Like I talk about safety, clarity, and hope all the time, right? So when we talk about our law firm, if we're going to take action, we're going to make sure that it's doing one of those things. If we're going to be, I don't know what to do with this particular problem. Okay, well, does it provide our clients with safety, clarity, and hope? If yes, then you're more inclined to do that. If not, then you're not going to do that thing, because those are our guiding principles. And so this is sort of what they're fleshing out for us. The fundamental principles that are going to be applied to the entire department to be reducing violent crime. So number 1 is they want to build trust and earn legitimacy. So they say meaningful law enforcement means you got to engage with, you got to connect with your community. They're saying this is an effective strategy. We're going to build trust, earn legitimacy, and that's going to be the foundation, which sounds great, right? I love local. Local's good. I don't like the feds coming in local, but okay, it's a good concept generally speaking. So I think one way to earn legitimacy is to sort of let the locals, handle issues themselves. We'll see if that is how this functions. I doubt it. Number 2, invest in prevention and intervention programs. Violent crime is not a problem that can be solved by law enforcement alone. The department must invest in community-based violence prevention and intervention programs. Okay, good with that. Target enforcement priorities, for enforcement efforts and priorities. It says it's effective when it focuses its limited enforcement resources on identifying, investigating, and prosecuting the most significant drivers of gun violence and other violent crime. We'll see how that's interpreted. Okay, but I say this all the time, right? I say this repeatedly. Why are they out there writing everybody traffic tickets all the time? It generates money, right? Serve and protect or tax collect. It's kind of that running joke here. And I'm not, I like to poke fun, to needle the police a little bit, but I truly mean that I think that most police are excellent human beings and good people. But there is a very loud, problematic, volatile contingent of law enforcement in general that certainly needs to be addressed. But I've always said this. Why are they, why are they stopping a grandma for going 11 miles over the speed limit? Okay, go get the person who's selling somebody fentanyl that's resulting in a bunch of deaths. But, it's like, well, no, that's not our responsibility. That's DEA. That's FBI. That is the Attorney General. We're just traffic police. Okay, I guess. Number 4 now. The department is measure results. Love to measure things. The fundamental goal of the work is to reduce the level of violence in our communities, not increase the number of arrests or prosecutions as if they were ends in themselves. We must measure the results. So listen, I love that. Okay. I don't like politicians who come in here and say, well, we're going to just be tough on crime, and that means we're going to arrest a bunch of people. Because what that means is a bunch of people, like a grandma wandering through, a building, is going to get arrested for something that maybe is not quite necessary for that person, right? So we've got all sorts of I've got a lot of different concerns about an overly active Justice Department. As soon as they start raising flags up, like we're going to go into psycho mode here, addressing violent crime, I start to get a little bit concerned about it. So now let's see what else they're talking about. Those principles sound great. Principles always sound great. I love principles, right? You can say, oh, it's beautiful. It's very poetic. Makes me feel good. Let's see what else they've got. Now it says the department recognizes that there is no one-size-fits-all solution and that the needs of each jurisdiction will vary based on the nature of the violent crimes. Thus, the department has committed to providing additional support. So the FBI now is going to make available cutting-edge analytical resources to state and local law enforcement to identify the most violent offenders and the most dangerous criminal organizations in the communities. The FBI will then deploy agents to assist with enforcement operations. Oh, gosh. So great. So the FBI now is going to come in, the same FBI that said that, I guess the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers and all of those people were going to take over they were going to take over the country. They were going to steal the podium, and that gives you unlimited American power if you do that. So they knew it was coming, and then they sort of failed and let him take over the building anyway and almost seized total control of the country. So they've got cutting-edge analytical resources now, and they're going to support state and local enforcement officials. That's great. So where feasible now, ATF is going to embed with local homicide units. So we've got more feds coming in, so that's great. They're going to expand the availability of the center, which is going to match ballistics to crime scenes. We've got the DEA, so the drug agents are going to come in. They're going to go on state, local, tribal law enforcement. They're going to disrupt the activities, the most violent drug trafficking gangs and egregious drug trafficking organizations. We'll see. I mean, they've been saying that for like 100 years now. We're going to go get just the bad guys. And then it turns out, it's Johnny down at Arizona State University. He's got, an ecstasy pill, narcotic drug, right? We're going to make sure he gets the book thrown at him. But somebody who's trafficking fentanyl across the borders, well, Kamala said, don't come to those people. So that's good. The United States Marshals Service, in coordination with state and local authorities, they're going to conduct fugitive sweeps. Great. State and local warrants for homicide, aggravated assault, firearm, aggravated robbery, robbery with a firearm, rape, or aggravated sexual assault. Department's grant-making components will highlight funding opportunities for community programs and on violent crime. Okay, so we'll see then, right? Kind of the principles, we'll see how those work in practice. Sound really great, but when it means that, we're just going to take a bunch of federal law enforcement agents and we're just going to cram them down the throats of the states because we want to go enforce gun laws that you're not going to enforce, we'll see how this plays out. And we've already seen the states almost in open rebellion over some of this stuff. We have seen that the state of Missouri, the governor there signed into law that said, if you come into our state and you try to impede any of our gun rights, we are going to fine you $50,000 an incident. And they said, yeah, federal agents also. So the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice fired a letter back and said, we don't agree with your analysis on this. We think that we have the supremacy clause and the feds have the ability to come in and actually tell you what to do, which is actually constitutionally more accurate than not, generally speaking. But the state's recourse is to say, okay, well, that's fine, but we're not going to enforce your laws. So if you want to enforce them, come and enforce them. And guess what? They're going to do it, as we now know. So Attorney General Merrick Garland now is releasing new anti-violent crime proposals. Joe Biden is just going to get out there and read whatever the people tell him to read. So we'll see what ultimately happens. The pendulum continues to swing, my friends, and a lot of innocent people and a lot of our lives are being caught up in this stupid game from our ineffective politicians. So a lot of innocent people are going to get caught up in this hyper enforcement, as is always the case. The government just says, we're just going to throw a bunch of money on agents and we're going to whatever. We're going to talk about in a later segment here just how the FBI maybe framed 4 people. They're going to be still in charge of a lot of this stuff. So there's a lot of problems in our justice system. We've got a lot to deal with. If you happen to know anybody, though, is also facing some justice problems, well, we've got a law firm here in Scottsdale, Arizona. We're pretty good at what we do. We love to help good people facing criminal charges find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases. and in their lives. And so if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona that needs help with one of these types of criminal charges, give our office a call. We would be very happy to speak with them. We can help with things like felony charges, drug charges. We've got traffic tickets. We've got DUI charges and much more that we can help with. And also, if you don't need any help with a criminal case, well, there's some good informational offerings that maybe you might consider. Over at gumroad.com, Robert Gruler got a 2.5-hour seminar that we did called Law Enforcement Interaction Training, available down here. Very, very interesting stuff. I go through the 1, 2, 3 rule for how to deal with law enforcement. Very, very simple framework for dealing with law enforcement. If you're interested in personal productivity, I have a different course here. And if you're a lawyer or a law firm, marketing person, and you're interested in how we sort of run our firm and how we have sort of grown quickly and helped a lot of people, that's another offering that you can check out there as well. Gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. And I appreciate all your support. And do not forget to head on over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is our community where we do other things. We've got a Zoom meetup that is coming up on Saturday. And then we have we've got a lot of other events that are just sort of in the works. And so I'd invite you to go on over there and check that out. We'd be very happy to have you there.